Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube. Like button, subscribe button, you know the deal. Always appreciate when you tune in, and you can find us on YouTube as part of Ampire Media, Ampire. Always much appreciated. Also, you can read my work on ESPN.com, and I have a story up now that I wrote with Jeremy Fowler about what went wrong with the Commanders this season, taking a look at the trade, Eric Bieniemy, Jack Del Rio, that the way that the firing was handled, etc. All that stuff is in there. And so I'm going to have Jeremy on in a minute so we can discuss what we learned from the reporting. To be honest, a lot of it for me, and Jeremy, once you start getting into it, I don't think there was a ton of surprises that we learned. We knew that there would have been unrest in some areas, especially with some of the players and Bieniemy. But we get into all that. And I don't think it's as simple as, oh, they're all right and this side is all wrong. I don't think there's ever, I think when you come to the NFL, it's rarely just a black and white issue as far as, there's always gray matter in there. And I think in this situation, you can say like, well, yes, they're upset with this, but you look at the other side and say, yeah, but. So I think there's a lot of stuff that we get into. Do me a favor, you go give that story a read. It's on ESPN.com. It ran Wednesday, so you're probably hearing this Thursday morning. So go give that a read and then listen to the conversation, and we go over a lot of stuff. I also talked to Jeremy, who is a national reporter for ESPN, of course, about some of the coaching names that we can expect to hear in the offseason, some of the GM candidates you might expect to hear, not just here, but for all over. And so some of the names he's going to bring up may not pertain to here, but they are going to be guys that are discussed in openings around the NFL. So I wanted to give you some of that as well. And then the national perspective on what's going on here. I always like a national set of eyes on this franchise to help you learn what outsiders think, maybe about the roster, about the coaching situation. How does this coaching situation compare to others that will probably be open in the offseason? So all that stuff with Jeremy. Go give that story a read. Thank you for tuning in. Now, here's my conversation with ESPN's Jeremy Fowler. Well, Jeremy, it's never dull around here with this franchise. And I'm curious, obviously we've been working on this for a little while and talking to people throughout. And for me, you hear things throughout this process, but I'm curious from your perspective, what kind of things either jumped out to you or that you found most intriguing or interesting about what you learned throughout this reporting process?
Well, I would say just the different personalities in the building and just the different perspectives that everybody came from. You have a head coach who's kind of trying to keep it all together, whose message is running a little hollow, probably.
Yeah.
We had some examples of that, and this is a head coach that is, I guess you could say, a delegator. Which can be a successful formula that's worked for him in the past. But between Scott Turner and then now Jack Del Rio fired, and then you bring in a new offensive coordinator and Eric Bieniemy, there's a lot of that plan is maybe uncertain because of you've delegated or deferred, and then like, okay, well, how much ownership did you take at the end to try to get it right? Which like the Bieniemy decision was a big one. That in itself is just the big bet on Bieniemy is fascinating, and all the layers that come with that. An accomplished coordinator who comes in probably with something to prove, and was given license to make changes and made them, and some of which was probably a shock to some players that were used to a certain way. So, and then you have the kind of the Del Rio piece of just this awkward firing, and just curiously fell apart defensively this year. And then you have an owner who's trying to absorb all this and figure it all out on the fly, and he just started on the job 5 months ago. So just I think to me, just the cast of characters in different perspectives was probably most eye-opening.
And I think obviously Bieniemy gets a lot of the headlines by people because of everything that surrounded him over the last few years, and he was also the big bet in the offseason.
Yeah.
When did you start hearing some issues? And like, I'll just say this, like, I know during the summer, you'd hear from some guys who would say, well, it's going like this now, but if they don't win, it's going to be trouble. And because of the work they were putting in and the way it was going, the whole package. But when did you start to hear some things that it wasn't really going all that well overall?
I would say probably week 6 or so. even though they were still in the mix at that point, you're just wondering how long they could survive. And then I know I was there in Washington and came to visit the team because I was in town covering a Baltimore Ravens game and popped over there. And that was right before the Giants game. And you could tell that they just, even talking to players, you could tell like that second Giants game, that is the one they lost again, that this was the last push and they knew it. But you didn't necessarily sense a lot of confidence as to how they could get that done.
Right.
And they knew they had to win games before the bye week or else they were out of it. And then it just, so, you sense a little, nobody would say it, but you probably sense a little bit of resignation of like, okay, we're still trying to figure this out and it might be too late.
Definitely.
So, yeah. So I would say like probably somewhere between weeks, 4 and 8, I guess.
And, obviously with Bieniemy, I mean, the reputation of him from beforehand. Was there any surprise to you how it's unfolded here with him?
I don't know if surprise is the right word, because, and I covered Eric Bieniemy at Minnesota with the Vikings, but when I used to cover that team back in 2010, 2011, and, he's unapologetically himself, right? He's going to be an intense coach. He's going to get on guys and, he's going to work really hard and try to set a tone. And, in Kansas City, or at least my sense talking to people there, they needed that a little bit. You had Andy Reid and then everybody had their role, and Eric Bieniemy played his role for Andy and, was tough on guys when needed to be, and it worked for them, and I think some of those star players probably needed that, where, coming into a new system with younger players and a younger offensive line, and they're trying to get their bearings. It was an interesting dynamic. It's not right or wrong. It's just, he came in with his plan. You give him credit that he came in with conviction and did everything that he wanted to do. And Sam Howell certainly got better, and there were some improvements. The offense has been better overall, but it's just, it was also an adjustment, and it's just been interesting to see it all unfold.
It has been, and I know, like, just from talking to guys, and I'm sure from you talking to guys, like, there's a mix here of the way they were being pushed versus maybe not seeing it, and they did improve, but I think they were hoping for more at this point in the year. And just, with some of the production. So how do you parcel out, like, from your perspective, maybe where some of the issues or the issues where they lie? Like, how do you parcel that out?
Like with the overall
as far
team?
As like, is it, how much of it is, being pushed to a certain level, and how much of it is pushed plus not producing? And maybe it's all of it.
You mean on offense or just overall?
On offense.
So, well, there's an argument that maybe they got worn out a little bit, with just the pace and the longer meetings and longer hours, and, coaches are working late. And, but on some end, it's like they needed that cultural change a little bit,
right.
They gotten soft. I hate to use that word, but just, did Washington have the hard edge and discipline needed to win? And I think that's in part why Bieniemy was brought in. And he delivered that. But it's also, the NFL's tricky where, there's more, we know more about science and resting players and kind of what they need to get through a long season and to keep everybody fresh, So I think there was a balance that they've probably been trying to find behind the scenes. It hasn't always been easy, but they overhauled the system. It's a lot of throwing, they use certain pass plays as what you would call an extension of the running game. And, that takes time, right? Like that's a different process with a young quarterback and an offensive line. It's not very good. And right. So I think when you consider that, they probably, and considering the commitment to passing the ball as much as they probably did about as good as you could have, maybe, like that you could always second guess whether Terry McLaurin should get the ball more or things like that. But, Sam Howell, for the most part, has been trending upward, and that's been a positive.
It has been. I also think, it's funny because you talk to some people and we had it in there, and it's like, you bring an offense where you're going to throw a lot, but behind a line that they didn't feel was built to protect a guy that throws a lot. So there was kind of an odd mix. And someone even said, he's going to have to realize that he doesn't have Patrick Mahomes here. And so I think that played into it. And I think the last few games, I think there's been an acknowledgement more of that with him.
Right. But now it's like it's too late because the defense is far gone.
The
right.
defense is cratered.
They're not coming back. So it's like whatever changes you make is almost too late. And there was a sentiment of like some people we talked to that thought Ron, should have stepped in maybe to be like, hey, we need to protect Sam a little bit.
Right.
More
Absolutely.
with balance,
And the whole funny thing about this is we talked a while ago, like if the defense had been better, story's not coming out now because they're in a better spot.
No.
And
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I think they ran out of gas. This is a team that was on the brink already. And it was a delicate year, and for whatever reason, the defense wasn't as good and doesn't look overly talented right now. I know they lost two good players in Montez Sweat and Chase Young, but they didn't look overly explosive before then. So it's, it was kind of a just plethora of issues, whether it's, they get out efforted one game or, they're not disciplined the next, like they just kind of just sloppy football, at least on that side of the ball.
How surprised are you, just again, from an outsider's perspective, at what's happened just on the field with them based on like, the game, but you also talked to a lot of people outside of here.
So like you're talking about the product overall?
Just the product overall. Yeah. The fact that they're 4-9 and, and that they're on the verge of going to just clean house.
Yeah. It's, when you really look at the big picture though, I can't say it's overly shocking in that some of the draft picks haven't worked. There just hasn't been a lot of cohesion with what they've been doing. It's like the games they won, you're kind of like sometimes you can catch a little bit of a rhythm, and you got a guy like Taylor Heineke who's comes in and will just take any circumstance, like, whatever you need me to do, I'm going to go out and do it and get it done. And then I think that his energy was contagious a little bit, and they played up probably better than they were. And so it's still, for me, it's still surprising they won the games they did. I didn't, aside from the defensive line, I just didn't see a team that was overly loaded with talent. So they kind of are what they are at this point when you look at the roster, like if you look at blue chip players at every position, there aren't a ton of them, so that's just something they'll have to shore up. And I think they are trying to by getting more draft picks, by trading the players that they did at the deadline, just to reset it. Right now you got 5 picks in the top 100 or whatever it is, you got cap space, you can redo it. You had a head coach who had the final say on personnel, and so like I don't know, it just they're how much influence did he have on the draft picks, or who's really making them? Like, they're just some of those questions come up that you wonder just about the roster overall.
And it's because we both talk to people who maybe feel like just, hey, change is not just warranted, but probably needed.
Yeah, I think so. It really, people we talk to for the story kind of acknowledge that it's probably needed for new direction across the board, right? Like they need, systematic, sustainable leadership with a new plan, And so I think you're going to see a guy like Josh Harris lean on his past experiences, with owning the 76ers and the New Jersey Devils, of like, you kind of have a mix of analytical slant with on-field acumen, right? And just battle-tested personnel people that have played or know the game, and you balance that with somebody who can manage everything with an analytical spirit. So I think that's probably what you'll see, is a little bit of that balance.
I'm curious too what you thought. Like, I've dealt in the Harris business for a lot of months now and gotten to know who he is and what he's about. I'm curious what you learned just from the reporting about this, because we had the examples of the trade and then also the firing of Del Rio.
Yeah, I think we learned that this is somebody who's pretty patient. It seems like he's not rolling in trying to, demand changes. And it seems like, at least with the Jack Del Rio firing, that he'll take a recommendation and then he'll push back as to why you want to follow through that recommendation, then he'll let you do it. Or in the case of the trade deadline, he'll nudge a little bit, maybe it's not an edict, but a suggestion. But like, hey, we need to get value for these players. So, I think he's a cooler head that prevails a little bit, and I think which is a good thing. I think is probably the antithesis of what they had before.
More than probably.
Yeah, but you look at cases like in Carolina, what we're seeing with them firing
Right.
coaches and David Tepper, that's clearly a case where the owner's meddling a lot and around all the time. And this is different. This is a guy who has multiple businesses, multiple teams he owns. He's running around. He's in Miami, New York, Philadelphia. So, they're not. I'm guessing he's not going to be there every day. He'll be hopping in and out. So I sensed a guy who's patient and pretty calculated, like he's going to lean toward just like the smart, methodical model, which is probably what they need.
Absolutely. So how do you view, again, like Ron Rivera still has a job, but it's 4-9, again, there's an inevitability to this. And, both you and I talked to people who said Ron is he feels resigned, you're resigned to your fate at this point.
Yeah.
So how would you view this job compared to what else is open and might come open?
So I'm trying to compare to the other jobs. So you have Vegas, you have Carolina, presumably you have Washington. You have jobs like the Bears or the Chargers that could open, and then you're gonna have some wild cards.
Right.
So out of those 5 I just mentioned, the one with the best quarterback situation is undoubtedly the Chargers.
Right.
But that's just, even though they're in LA, that's still considered sort of a smaller market team in a way. Washington ranks pretty high. I don't know if I'd put them first in that group, but definitely above Carolina. Definitely above. I'd probably put them above Chicago. They've at least been more competitive. Right now you're going to be picking 4th in the draft, right?
Yeah, right now 4th.
And that plus 4 other picks in the top 100. You got a ton of cap space. You got an owner that's going to be committed, but not meddling, is my sense.
Right.
That's a good formula. Like, it's going to be a pretty coveted job, I think. I don't know about number 1, but it's going to be high.
And I would agree with that, just for the reason you said. And I think just having Josh Harris here, and this is why, for me, when people would talk about like just fire Ron already, whether it was a few weeks ago, whatever, and why wouldn't he? To me, it's because he was telling people, I'm going to give him the year. And I think by holding true to his word, I think that all that too, in addition to all that, that you have an owner that's going to stay true to what he tells you.
Right. Yeah. And I think, the owner figures like, what am I, what are we really going to gain by firing Ron 4 games left,
Right.
And this is an accomplished figure, this is a guy who's won games. It's not, a fill-in interim type coach or a first-time young coordinator who got a head coaching job. He's been around. So I do think Josh Harris wanted to show him respect. I think he has a good relationship with Ron. I don't think they have any issues in that regard as far as their communication on a professional level. So, it's just like, let's ride this out. That's why I just said, hey, let's, it is a disappointing season. He sent that statement out, that didn't say a whole lot, but it at least alluded to the fact that like, hey, I'm just trying to get through the year like you are, and they'll go from there.
Yeah, and I think then we'll see him put his full stamp on this franchise. What do you think Bieniemy's future will be or is?
That's a good question, because that's hard.
What?
Because he's interviewed for what is it, 14 jobs, I believe.
14 teams, 15.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Obviously well qualified. Obviously more pedigree than most any other candidate, but it's clear it hasn't worked out. It's clear that, some teams, when they do their research or they interview him, they just aren't ready to do it to make him a head coach. I don't know how much has changed for better or worse this year. Other than, he's shown he can design his own offense and he can run the show. And, obviously he did call plays in Kansas City to an extent, but it was Andy Reid's baby. And so he showed that he can run his own deal. And really he was in a lot of ways the head coach of Washington. So, but your record is what you are. So if you sit at 4-9, some of that falls on him as well. So I don't know that it hurts his campaign. I've talked to a couple of people who still think he'll be in the mix, maybe the interview cycle. But I'd probably be surprised if he got a head coaching job at this point, based on all the interviews he's done, which leaves him as a strong coordinator candidate, assistant head coach candidate. and I'm sure he'll fulfill one of those roles somewhere.
Two more things. Sam Howell, you brought him up. I'm curious the perception of him maybe from other. I don't know how much have you talked to him with other people outside or just in the league, and what is the general thought about him?
Well, I think I know that like coaches I've talked to really like his toughness. I mean, the guy's taking a gazillion sacks and he gets back up. He's not afraid to hang in there and make the throw. One of the comparisons I've gotten is like a more athletic, stockier Baker Mayfield, which I don't know if that's a good thing. Maybe it's just because they kind of have similar builds a little bit, but you get that comparison a little bit of like a guy who can really spin it, but is somewhat limited by whether it's the height or the ability to kind of make the off schedule plays you need. So I think right now he's looked at as kind of like a middle tier starter that you can win some games with in 2024. And he's probably the perfect quarterback for bringing in, a draft pick if you want to get a number 4 overall pick. Drake May's there, one of those guys. I don't know if they will be, but there's no harm in keeping the quarterback you have and still drafting one. Like, it's the most important position. Why don't you just try to knock it out of the park?
And especially for a franchise that's been searching for one for decades. Last thing, it's a little bit jumping the gun, but again, we know where this is going.
Yeah.
But just in general, some of the top coaching candidates that you expect to be named. I mean, obviously Ben Johnson's going to be a name. Who are some other guys that you would say to watch going forward, and GMs as well?
Yeah. So, Jim Harbaugh, I think, is one to watch. I do think he's going to try to get back in the league. I don't know that he's the coveted. He's a big name, but I don't know if he's as coveted by NFL teams as he's maybe made out to be. But I do think there could be a suitor for him, and he's obviously proven. You mentioned Ben Johnson. Brian Johnson in Philadelphia, I think, is an intriguing candidate. And as far as like minority candidates, he's got to be one of the strongest. And then, look, the young offensive mind, like teams are trying to get in on those guys early if they can. Sometimes that's the way teams operate. Worked for the Rams with Sean McVay. That's why you could see like Houston's Bobby Slowick, offensive coordinator, they're getting some looks, even if it's premature a little bit. I think he'll be in the mix there. Miami's Frank Smith. I hear good things about him.
So do I.
Ejiro Evero in Carolina, like, even though it's been a nightmare of a season there, their defense has remained good, and he's been in the mix in multiple jobs. I do think, defensively he'll be there. Mike McDonald in Baltimore, like, it would not shock me if he got one. I think at the very least he'll be a prominent figure in all this. That he's a sharp guy, and that defense has been really good. But I feel like the big one is Bill Belichick, right? I do think, and I've been talking to other teams about this. Like, is he a buzzworthy hot top candidate on the coaching carousel? It's like a weird thing to say,
Yeah.
Because you just haven't thought of Belichick as that. But assuming they move on or they part ways somehow, is he an Andy Reid type figure from when he went to Philadelphia to Kansas City, had great success, or is he somebody that maybe teams will be scared away from because of the age and because of his personnel struggles at times, just with the draft picks and some of the acquisitions they made. So we obviously know he can coach, but I do think he'll be on the circuit in some capacity.
Yeah, and I don't think it will be here for whatever that's worth.
Yeah,
Dan Quinn's another name I would throw out there. Because
Dan Quinn. There's so many. I know. Yeah,
Quinn, there's a lot. Sure. There's a lot. Right.
I think this is the year for Dan Quinn. I do actually. He's been close on a couple of these, and I do think it will happen.
And then with GM candidates, are there a couple that you would say, because obviously Adam Peters is a guy that a lot of people will want, but who are a couple others that you would throw out there now in addition?
Yeah, I would say Adam Peters he might be the top candidate. This is a proven guy. They've been great there for a while now. Let's see. I put me in the spot here. I'm gonna have to look.
Sorry. Well, there's like Ian Cunningham with Chicago. Ed Dodds.
Oh yeah. I like to look at the team. So yeah, Ian Cunningham. I mean, he pretty much turned down that Arizona job last year. A really sharp guy. Has Chicago done enough for them to get looks? But I think he'll be in the. I do. Glenn Cook in Cleveland's another young up and coming minority candidate that's really good. And there are many others I'm sure I'm forgetting, but those are a few that come to mind.
Yeah, I think like Nolan Teasley's another guy because he's Seattle. It's a good organization, and who knows? And I don't know. And it's so early in the process. I just wanted, you just like to just start talking about names because it's in a few weeks, it's going to become even bigger. So anyway, Jeremy, I appreciate it and great work on the story. And I'm glad that we got it out there, and you can go give it a read on ESPN.com. And there you go. I felt like it was a good, fair look into what's happened to Washington this season.
So no doubt. Appreciate your help on it.
That's it for this week. Thanks to Jeremy for tuning in, and thank you as always for listening. I'll be back on Monday with another episode. Have a good weekend. It's a bye week. I think we all needed it. Talk to you next time.